I appreciate you taking the time to speak today, Derek. Obviously, fundraising mode. Just got back from the Startup World Cup.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the experience at the Startup World Cup.
Yeah.
Made it all the way to the finals, right?
Yeah, we made it to the finals, the grand finale, which was in San Francisco a couple weeks ago. So to get there, we had to win the regional of the Startup World Cup. So they have regionals all over the world. And so for the LA Orange County regional, I had to beat out 9 other startups.
Okay.
It was actually held in this building, and the prize was to go to the grand finale and compete for $1 million investment.
Okay. And this was just focused on life science and healthcare companies, or
completely agnostic.
Okay.
So anybody and everybody.
Okay.
There were, I think, like 84 companies that pitched.
Okay.
10 made it to the final pitch round, which we didn't make it into that final 10.
Okay.
It was frustrating because not only was it industry agnostic, it was stage agnostic. And so it begs the question is, what is really a startup? Because the company that won had over 50 million in an investment, had an $18 billion contract. And another company had raised 30 million, was already profitable. And so, you're comparing apples to oranges. It wasn't exactly what I anticipated in terms of just being an equal playing field, but it was a good experience.
Yeah.
So we're going to build our team up, right? So we have a CFO and a COO, which I need to start paying at the level that they deserve to be paid at. We need to bring on a regulatory expert, which we've already earmarked.
Okay.
And she's ready to join the team as soon as we have the money. And we've got to essentially finish building our device. That'll cost a little bit over $1 million. So we're working with a design and manufacturing firm here in Orange County. They've got over 40 years experience building devices, including Hydrofacial, which is the number one device in aesthetics. So they know what they're doing. But essentially, they're going to help us build those first few devices, essentially 3D printed cartridges, manufacturing those initial platforms. But then they'll help us essentially source contract manufacturers to scale the manufacturing.
I see. Okay.
And then regulatory, legal, intellectual property is obviously a big cost. So, we need to continue to file our patents, pay our lawyers, and get our product through the FDA, which obviously has an expense. And then finally, we have to kind of just build out our operations and our sales teams. Okay. Obviously, there's a marketing expense with a product launch, and we need to hire sales executives and establish our incentive plan for our key opinion leaders. Excuse me. So we plan to launch our product with at least 30 surgeon KOLs, surgeon key opinion leaders.
Okay.
And we want an incentive structure that is very favorable, because the keys to a medical device product launch is surgeons, number one, using your device, but liking your device. Changing surgeon behavior is very challenging. And so, it's more important that surgeons are selling our product than a sales rep.
I see.
Because the only one who's going to convince a surgeon to change their habits is another surgeon at the end of the day.
Okay. And so as a surgeon, what are, I guess, some of the barriers to selling into, a surgical setting? As you said, surgeons prefer to buy from surgeons, and it's really hard to sell to surgeons. What makes it so hard?
Yeah. So time. Most sales reps will tell you that, non-surgeon sales reps that go into clinical practices, they'll go to a clinic, and try to get FaceTime with the surgeon, and they may be there for 2 hours and only get 5 minutes with the surgeon. So just to be in the setting and get enough FaceTime to sway opinion is challenging, if not impossible.
I see.
And I come from the plastic surgery space. I go to the big plastic surgery meeting every year, and decisions are made once a year or once every 2 years in terms of adopting new technology.
Okay.
And typically those decisions are made maybe at the conference, because they actually get to see the thing, get their hands on the thing and demo it, things like that. Plastic surgeons are used to spending a lot of money on capital equipment, but it's a decision that they make like once every year, once every 2 years. And all of the big companies lean on the key opinion leaders to say, yeah, I use the device, therefore you should use the device. Because, obviously surgeons are looking up to other surgeons.
Yes, medical influencer marketing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I understand. Okay. And then at an industry level, the adoption of new technology is taking place at the conference, or are you talking about an individual practice level with a particular surgeon? So in terms of, I guess, like the influence, element of selling into, a surgical practice, if you were to show up at a conference with your device, the entire industry is there, I'm sure. Is it kind of a collective cosign, for lack of better words, in terms of how they're going to, or what they're going to adopt moving forward over the next year? Or are surgeons and individual practices making those decisions independently, obviously considering various factors, but you can sell directly into a practice, and this isn't something that needs to be necessarily co-signed by the entire industry?
Yeah, I mean, anybody can buy a booth if you got money, right? That doesn't validate your product.
Okay.
And there are many products that launch and fail. I remember maybe 3 or 4 years ago, a startup company had one of the biggest booths at the meeting, and that company no longer exists. And they had tons of money and investment, but didn't necessarily either figure out product market fit or what they were selling wasn't kind of matching what they were actually able to deliver. But no, this is like an individual decision. Most plastic surgeons work in a solo or dual practice. It's 1 or 2 people.
Okay.
They have their own clinic, their own surgery center, or they contract with other surgery centers, and they decide which devices are going to bring value to their practice. Plastic surgery is very unique in that if you're not on social media, you don't exist. And so plastic surgeons are always marketing to consumers on social media, but plastic surgeons are also seeing what other plastic surgeons are doing on social media as well.
I see.
And so, if the most influential surgeon who does the most of this procedure uses this particular device, then other surgeons who want to establish that foothold are going to probably be influenced by what devices they're using.
That makes perfect sense. What was the observation that you had that led you to starting your journey now, building this startup with this particular medical device?
So that's a twofold question in my mind, because the first thing that really inspired me to build technology to make this process better was a paper that came out, I believe in 2013. The lead authors were Alex Verpaal and Patrick Tenard. They are Belgian plastic surgeons.
Okay.
And they published a paper on the topic nanofat grafting, which is a technique they developed where they take fat that they harvested via liposuction, and then they shuffle that fat between a syringe connector to create a therapeutic that they were injecting to reduce skin wrinkles, skin discoloration, and just generally improve the skin. That paper didn't delve so deep into the science. And so I took that on as my research project when I was a research fellow at UC Irvine in the Center for Tissue Engineering. And essentially started to reverse engineer the science and see why it was working and were there ways we could improve it. It's a completely manual process, and because it's manual, it's inherently variable, meaning you're going to get different results. The force I used to push fat through a connector is going to be different than the force that you used.
I see.
And I strongly believe that precision and reproducibility is important in trying to market a product. And so that was the first kind of task or goal. When we looked at the science behind this kind of nanofat processing, we noticed that there were certain stem cell populations that are critical to regenerative medicine in general. And it's always been a goal of mine to do something that's going to be good for humanity. And so we looked at, can we use this for wound healing? And we happened to uncover that a specific population of stem cells that were being enriched with this process was a population critical to diabetic foot ulcer healing. And so that's kind of the genesis of how we got the grants, because it was to pursue a goal like that. It's much more difficult to get a grant for an aesthetics type device. It's not a noble thing to make the world prettier. But it's easier to pursue something from a grant standpoint that's actually reaching unmet need, which would be the treatment of like a diabetic foot ulcer. That's kind of how like the research started. When I started plastic surgery residency and was in the operating room all the time, the aha moment for me was just watching the attending surgeon go to a back table in the operating room after doing the liposuction to process fat. And that surgeon might be processing fat on a back table for anywhere from 30 minutes to 45 minutes, even an hour, just, moving fat from one container to another and spinning it in a centrifuge or using a device that they purchased to process the fat. And meanwhile, the patient is literally sitting on the table, like operating rooms are cold. So they're sitting on a cold table. The anesthesiologist is like doing Sudoku or trading stocks. The circulating nurse is probably on like her phone or whatever, the computer, just like scrolling social media. And it's like, this is a colossal waste of time. And it's a colossal waste of resources. Every minute in the operating room, at least according to the last study I looked at, is worth $38. And so if you can shave 45 minutes off of a surgery, not only have you saved hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, but also you reduce the risk to the patient, because every additional minute that a patient is under anesthesia, there's an increased risk of a complication. And I was on the road to a career in plastic surgery, but the aha moment was there's got to be a better way of streamlining this process, because almost every patient who gets plastic surgery gets liposuction. And increasingly, almost every patient is getting some form of fat grafting. So if you can touch a procedure that almost 100% of plastic surgery patients get, you can have a multiplying effect, or what's the word I'm looking for? An exponential impact on patient care delivery in the plastic surgery space.
If you don't mind, I'd like to take a couple steps back. What are stem cells, and what's the connection to stem cells, fat that comes from liposuction, fat grafting, and regenerative medicine?
Sure. So the stem cells is a catch-all term. It's kind of a not necessarily favorable term, because back when George Bush Jr. was president, they outlawed the use of embryonic stem cells. So there's different kinds of stem cells. There's embryonic stem cells, which are pluripotent. So there's embryonic stem cells, which are pluripotent. And then there's adult stem cells, if you will, which are multipotent. So pluripotent means the cells can turn into almost any kind of tissue or any kind of organ, if you will.
Interesting. So these are just ordinary cells that can then imitate or evolve or
transform. So yeah, when we are conceived, you start out with essentially a zygote, an egg, and the sperm, and when they implant, it's not like you have a fully formed human there yet. You got this tissue that is very undeveloped, if you will. And over time, those cells multiply and differentiate into specific subtypes to form different parts of the body.
Okay.
Because the zygote and the sperm don't have any bone in them. They don't have muscles. They don't have epithelium or skin. So that stuff has to, over time, evolve and form down different lineages. And so embryonic stem cells have that ability to differentiate into almost any kind of cell type. Multipotent stem cells, which are adult stem cells, if you will, don't have that level of differentiation capacity, but they can still differentiate into specific subtypes: soft tissue, cartilage, bone. They don't have that ability to differentiate into essentially any cell type, but they have the ability to differentiate into the cell types that are kind of critical to wound healing and the building blocks of our tissue.
Okay.
And so the stem cells in fat are mesenchymal or mesenchymal stem cells, just like the stem cells that we find in bone marrow.
Okay.
And so bone marrow transplants and bone marrow taps is a word that we've heard for decades. The reason it's not a procedure that is common or growing is because harvesting bone marrow is an extremely painful procedure. And the yield of the stem cells that come from bone marrow is it's unpredictable or it's low relative to the amount of pain and resources that have to be used to harvest them. And so I think it was 2011, something like that. A researcher out of UCLA, Patricia Zook, took some fat tissue and discovered that there's stem cells in the fat tissue, just like the stem cells you find in bone. And so, flash forward several years, people are now exploring the uses of these stem cells, which can differentiate for various uses. And so, everybody's searching for the fountain of youth. We know that our liver regenerates. It's one of the few organs in our body that you can remove 80% of it and it'll grow back. We also know that, if you bite your mucosa of your mouth, like the inside, the gum of your mouth, and you gash it, it heals almost perfectly. You don't have a scar there. So it's one of the parts of the body that has this amazing regenerative potential. And so for years, doctors have been looking for how does the body repair itself like this? And the answer is stem cells. We've got stem cells all throughout our body. It's really, how can we unlock the potential of those stem cells for regenerative potential? And so we learned that fat is the largest reservoir of these adult stem cells in the body. And we also know that stem cells have tremendous potential in virtually any kind of reparative process in the body. And so, for instance, you talked about being an athlete. We've been searching for minimally invasive therapeutics to heal joints for years. And what's probably the most popular procedure right now in the kind of the orthopedics, pain, and rehab space is the use of platelet-rich plasma, PRP.
Yeah.
And PRP is extremely popular because patients are getting really good results to treat joint pain, which is essentially a surrogate for arthritis, by injecting these platelets, which release growth factors. And so those growth factors are great for helping the body heal. But platelets have a limited amount of growth factors, whereas cells, which I don't want to get too basic science, but essentially cells have the machinery to produce growth factors. Platelets are packaged with growth factors, whereas cells can produce endless growth factors. So there's just much more potential for a stem cell in the setting of healing a joint than platelets, which have a limited machinery to do that work.
I see.
And so increasingly, orthopedic doctors and rehab doctors and pain doctors who are injecting joints are starting to explore the use of PRP plus stem cells or stem cells on their own. And they're seeing really promising results, so much so that the industry is moving towards a lot less surgery and a lot more just injections with biologic materials that come from the patient.
I see. It seems like the ability to extract and then process the fat with these stem cells seem to be the limiting factor for the applications. And then that's where you guys come in.
Yeah, I mean, we have the ability to properly process fat today, but the methods are inefficient and very time consuming.
I see.
And in the operating room, it's always a balance of time and outcomes. You can work faster and probably have less favorable outcomes, or you can work slower and have amazing outcomes. But every surgeon has to make that decision when they're in the operating room. In the plastic surgery space, you ask 10 different surgeons how they process fat for fat grafting, you probably get 10 or 8 or 9 different answers.
Mm-hmm.
In the orthopedic space, ortho pain and rehab, they're less familiar with fat stem cells because they don't do liposuction, or at least they're not trained to do liposuction when they're learning how to replace joints and fix tendons and ligaments and whatnot. If you go to orthopedic and pain and rehab meetings, they're now teaching surgeons how to do liposuction because they know it's an emerging field and it's being demanded of them from their patients. And so for those ortho pain and rehab surgeons, they're even less comfortable using, say, the 10 different methods that plastic surgery is using. So they're going to buy a device, and the devices that are out there are very primitive or require off-label use of things that is not necessarily recommended by the government. But none of those tools that are out there are automated or offer, that precision I was talking about.
Mm-hmm. So then kind of walk me through your vision for the device that you're building and how it improves upon these existing solutions in the market.
Right. So our device is multifunctional. And what that means is it's designed to produce both fat grafting for large volume applications like body contouring.
Mm-hmm. And that's just liposuction, correct?
Well, so let's segment it out. There's essentially three buckets you can put kind of handling of fat into. So there's the extraction portion, that's the liposuction.
Okay.
There's the processing portion, and then there's the delivery portion. Right now, we're not focused on the liposuction portion, and we're not really focused on the delivery portion. We're just focused on the processing portion. And so surgeons will continue to do whatever they do to harvest fat from a patient. That's when our device comes in. After the fat is out of the patient, they put the fat in our device to get the therapeutic. And so our device can create essentially 2 different kinds of therapeutics. It can create a large volume fat therapeutic for contouring. So like think Brazilian butt lift or breast augmentation, or it can produce essentially a nanofat type product, which is like that stem cell type product, essentially broken down fat tissue. And it does so fully automated. So it's a pump-based system, and that's kind of our core intellectual property, is combining peristaltic pumps with essentially labs on a chip, is what we that's kind of like the engineering term. So we've got a series of chips that we've patented that are used to process the fat in different ways. And so the pump guides the fat through these chips to produce a therapeutic, and it does so very quickly, very efficiently, and maximizes the recovery of cells with good viability. And it also, from our research, activates these cells or enriches these cells with stem cell markers, indicating that our device makes the therapeutic more potent than anything you might see on the market. No, that was kind of a long-winded answer.
No, this is good. I'm learning as well. So This is very helpful to have it kind of broken down. And so then take me through the next step. Talk to me then about what are some of the implications now of that yield that you've now processed for this fat? And then take me through kind of like the life cycle of that stem cell therapeutic that you then process from this liposuction fat, and how that then goes on to be used for patients or whomever else is in need of stem cell therapies.
So our device is designed for autologous-based therapeutics. Autologous means same into same. So these are same day procedures, essentially. The patient comes in for a liposuction procedure and gets injected in the same setting.
The exact same patient.
The exact same patient, the exact same setting. Our device is not designed to extract and process fat from one patient and then it gets like frozen or stored or anything like that. This is for single setting, procedures. And so it's a printer cartridge, if you will. The platform is the printer. And then we've got single patient disposable cartridges that do all the work. And so if a patient comes in and they want to get, a breast augmentation with just fat, the surgeon will do a liposuction procedure. Our device will produce most of that fat in the form of that large volume fat grafting, but it'll also produce a little bit of that kind of nano fat equivalent stem cell product, because at the end, it layers the large volume fat with the stem cell fat, because we're creating like essentially a stem cell enriched fat graft. Every patient who gets fat injected from this large volume standpoint, they're going to have a stem cell enriched fat graft, which no other product on the market or no other device on the market can do. The reason that's important is because there have been multiple studies that show when you add stem cells back to fat prior to fat grafting, you get just a higher quality fat graft. You get better vascularity, meaning blood vessels. You get a reduction in like oil cysts, and you just get better take of the graft. If we take a step back, what we learned historically as plastic surgeons is if you take fat out and put it back, you're going to get resorption, meaning the body's going to resorb some of that fat. And studies have shown you don't know if 20% of that fat's going to take or 80% of that fat is going to take.
That's a really wide range.
Yeah. You're never going to really, I mean, you know, some people will say you're going to get over 80%, but all the data would suggest that 80% is as good as it gets. Studies have shown when you add stem cells back to the fat, you approach 80% every time. And so one unique value of our device is that it produces the industry's first stem cell enriched fat graft, which should be the highest quality fat graft on the market. The other thing that our device does is it creates that stem cell therapeutic that you can just directly extract from the cartridge and inject if you want to use it for, you know, skin rejuvenation, wrinkle reduction type applications, those stem cell applications, or if you want to inject it into a joint for that kind of ortho pain rehab application.
I see. What are some of the other common applications that you see?
Sure. So some of the applications that we know they're using for today include hair loss. So essentially injecting the hair follicles to stimulate hair growth.
And that's a stem cell application?
Yep.
Really? Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Some other examples, and these are a little bit more kind of in the weeds, but surgeons are using it for vaginal rejuvenation.
Yeah.
As women age, you get atrophy down there and less lubrication and stuff, and so they were using it to kind of really enhance the female genitalia. They are using it to treat a very painful condition called perianal fissures, which are essentially scar around the anus. That is just a very painful and difficult condition to live with. Let's see, what are some others? So obviously the wound healing.
Yeah. And you talked about diabetic foot ulcers, right?
Yeah. So a really interesting study happened a couple years ago. A group from Wake Forest partnered with a team down in Nicaragua, and their goal was to see if these fat stem cells could be used in an under-resourced environment. And so they found a group of essentially day laborers in Nicaragua who had both severe diabetes and critical limb ischemia, meaning their feet were not getting good blood flow. All of these laborers were evaluated and found to be essentially end-stage diabetic foot ulcers, meaning they were amputation candidates. These researchers took fat stem cells and injected the feet around kind of the arteries that feed the foot with a single treatment, a single injection, and then asked that the day laborers essentially do just daily wound dressing changes, just basic wound care. 6 months later at follow-up, they found that 75% of those day laborers, their wounds were completely healed. And like 94% of those, their wounds were healed like 80% or greater. So they've proven in a country that, you know, lacks this kind of access to care that we have, and laborers who work in dirty environments were able to heal wounds that were going to lead to amputation. So that shows the tremendous potential that fat stem cells can have, especially in, under-resourced environments. And I think that's the true kind of impact that this kind of device could have. Doesn't take a lab to like grow tissue in a lab over weeks of time. You can do a single procedure in the setting with the patient, no matter where you are in the world, and they have a much better chance at recovery and improving a wound that otherwise would lead to like an amputation and disability.
I see. What are some of the fields within the medical space that you see the biggest traction? I guess orthopedics being one, but you see the most traction now in terms of adoption of these fat stem cells and applications within their specific vertical. And then where do you see it going from there? Do you see kind of mass adoption across the spectrum in terms of, different practices, different specialties, or are you seeing mainly potentially some very, very significant impacts in maybe a handful of specialties?
Yeah, I think it's more of the latter. Obviously, we're building a device that we believe every plastic surgeon will want to use because every plastic surgeon does liposuction. Almost every plastic surgeon does some form of fat grafting. And so if you have a device that is the most powerful tool for the procedure they do the most, it's going to be a need to have, not a want to have.
I see.
But beyond that, we think the biggest hero indication is in the ortho, pain, and rehab space. So right now there's one company in a phase 3, if you will, clinical trial, an IDE study for the treatment of knee arthritis with essentially microfragmented fat, which is similar to this nano-fat product. They've injected tens of thousands of joints and they're getting really tremendous results. They've established CPT codes for the reimbursement of utilizing their device with the hopes that insurance companies and Medicare and Medicaid will start reimbursing for using their device. And so once government agencies and insurance companies are reimbursing for a product, the product just sells itself because doctors are now going to be instructed to use this device for this procedure as opposed to something more expensive like a knee replacement.
Neat.
And so I think that shows the tremendous potential for fat stem cells in the ortho, pain, and rehab space. And while this first study is just for knees, it's just, it's a slippery slope. We start with knees and then we get to like hands and we get to shoulders and we get to ankles, et cetera. But as we age, everyone develops arthritis and nobody wants a joint replacement. So if we can at least stave off the need for a joint replacement for several years, there can be massive growth in this category. Beyond that, we're starting to see these regenerative surgery conferences pop up, and plastic surgery is at the seat of the table, but you're starting to see more ortho, pain, and rehab doctors at these meetings, OBGYN at these meetings. 20, 30 years from now, we don't necessarily know the applications, but there's already research that shows that you can use fat stem cells to grow bone, to heal heart tissue, to heal lungs. During COVID, they were actually injecting patients with fat stem cells and showed that those cells were localizing in the lung tissue to heal the lungs. And so, sky's the limit in terms of the potential therapeutic applicability of our device, but it could very well reach almost every facet of medicine.
Wow, that's powerful. And if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like the fat stem cell isn't necessarily going to be marketed as a substitute for existing treatments or solutions. For example, invasive surgery, pain relievers, things of that sort, but more of a long-term complement for, I guess, a more sustainable recovery and repair of the body, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, I mean, we're moving towards prevention.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody wants these days, nobody wants to get a facelift after they've already kind of lost all their connective tissue. People are getting facelifts at much earlier ages because they want to kind of just keep that young look forever. Nobody want to wait till they have a stage 4 knee that needs a joint replacement. If you got a little knee pain, why not kind of bolster it with a much cheaper procedure and prolong your playing career? So, yeah, I think we are moving towards, this personalized medicine, and in that includes therapies that are kind of based on your own self, that kind of help you just live a longer, happier life.
Well, it seems pretty clear that there's a need for your device. You're currently actively working towards getting it to market as quickly as possible. But again, I'm interested now. You've kind of talked a little bit about the inspiration, the genesis for why this was even started, why you even went down this journey to begin with. But I'm curious now, having gone through, now the process of building the prototype, all the ups and downs and fundraising. What are the beliefs and convictions you have now that are keeping you motivated about the future for you to continue to go through this process as a founder, especially at the early stage, where you're essentially fighting very hard day to day, day in and day out to get your product to market? What's your source of motivation moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing I would say is that customer discovery is critical to the success of any business. Product market fit is critical to the success of any business. We received an I-Corps grant from the National Science Foundation, and that grant is money just to do customer discovery. Not only did that money enable us to interview over 100 surgeons and office managers and nurses and consumers in the space to make sure that what we're developing is actually going to meet unmet need in the industry, we learned how to continuously do customer discovery. And if we're not talking to the patient, if we're not talking to the end user, which is the surgeon, to make sure we're building something that they actually want, then, we're doing ourselves a disservice and we're lighting money on fire. I'm truly inspired by the fact that I go to plastic surgery meetings all over the world. I give talks, and there's always essentially a line to talk to me at the end of my talks because surgeons are like, "This is amazing. I've been waiting for something like this." And that's powerful. I mentioned that we plan to launch with 30 surgeon key opinion leaders. But in addition to that, our clinical advisory board constitutes some of the most powerful surgeons in the world. So for instance, Dr. Stephen Williams, he is the immediate past president of the American Society of Plastic Surgeons. He's a body contouring expert and one of the most influential surgeons in the world. When I asked him if he wanted to join our board, he was like, absolutely. Like, what you're building is truly transformational for plastic surgery. And it'll make my life easier. And I know if it'll make my life easier, it's gonna make a lot of surgeons' lives easier. Patrick Tenard and Alex Verpaul, I mentioned them. They invented this nanofat technique. They are some of the most influential regenerative surgeons in the world, and they're also on our clinical advisory board. We have Dr. Ricardo Rodriguez, who's a former president of IFATS, which is like one of the largest fat stem cells conference in the world. And we also have Ethan Kellum, who is an orthopedic surgeon in Tennessee. He does 95% orthobiologics, meaning he's pretty much just injecting joints. And he's also a team doctor for USA Basketball, as well as a team doctor and stem cells orthopedist for the Tennessee Titans. So, the surgeons we've recruited on our advisory board are truly like top of the game. And the fact that they see what we're building, the vision, and the value of what we're building, they want to be a part of it. So that's one thing that motivates me. Another thing that motivates me is generating a tool that truly has universal appeal. It can be used anywhere in the world, in any environment, and it's going to have impact. The reason for developing a technology that is only designed for use in the same setting is when you're injecting fat or anything that you took out of a patient, it's going to be safe because there's no chance of rejection. When you think about like an organ transplant or a blood transfusion, you have to get typed. You need to know the blood type. You need to know other kinds of matching in terms of antibodies and antigens so that there's no rejection. Because if I give you my kidney and we're not a match, your body's going to fight it until that kidney is out of you or you're dead. If I give you a blood transfusion and we don't make sure we're compatible blood types, then your body's going to reject that and you're going to be in the ICU. Developing a therapeutic that is based on one's own tissue means that it has universal applicability and it's safe. And so that's why we could deploy our device in Nicaragua, and the surgeon has minimal training, but I would be confident that they would be able to use that safely. And that therapeutic that is generated from our device is going to have maximal impact.
Excellent. And in terms of, like you said, you rattled off your clinical advisory board, which is star-studded, right? Like you mentioned, not only do they see the opportunity, but clearly they see something in you as the person who's bringing this to the world. What do you think it is that they're seeing in you as a founder that gives them the conviction and the excitement about this opportunity that you're now bringing into the market moving forward?
I mean, to use that sports analogy, man, I think I just got that dog in me, man. I am tenacious. Never give up. I've studied a lot in the space, and so my background, I did undergraduate at the University of Virginia. I studied cognitive science, neuroscience. So not real. I mean, it's not hard like basic science, but it kind of laid out that foundation of scientific exploration. And after that, I did medical school at Meharry Medical College. While I was at Meharry, I was doing research throughout my medical school training. I also became the first Meharry student to also get a joint MBA from Vanderbilt University. And so I got a healthcare MBA while I was in medical school, continued to do research. And then I went off to the lab instead of going straight into like my residency training. I spent several years studying microbiology and excuse me. I spent several years studying immunology and cell biology, and that really laid the framework for what would become my role in the Center for Tissue Engineering Lab at UC Irvine. And so when I got to UC Irvine, I started off in the research lab because I was trying to learn more about the plastic surgery space. That was not my original pursuit when I was in medical school. And so I got into the Center for Tissue Engineering Lab, and I was essentially the only employee. There was the director and then myself. And so it was intimidating because essentially I had to direct my own path for the most part. But it also gave me the discipline and the validation that I was cut out for this, because I essentially saw that nanofat paper and ran with it. I had to develop my own assays, experiments, and ask questions and then find answers to them. And that was recognized because I was then able to get the National Endowment for Plastic Surgery grant from the Plastic Surgery Foundation, which, they don't give many of those out. But also after my first publication, I met Patrick Tenard at a meeting in San Diego, and he'd already read all my work, and he was like, what you're doing is really important stuff, so keep at it. But yeah, man, I mean, all my life I've been told I wasn't going to do something, and not only did I do it, I excelled. And so I think people see just that tenaciousness, that doggedness, but also the success. Because you can be gritty and fail. But I'm gritty and I keep winning. And so I think people want to be tied to that train.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, Derek, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. I'm glad that I have the privilege to walk with you on this journey, and I'm looking forward to see what you do when you bring your device to market for every single plastic surgeon in the United States of America and beyond.
Appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Yes, sir.